So here we are in another video where we are learning how to use the Xamarin tools to make our Android applications in C#.net. And in the last video in this series, I showed you how to render out some HTML and be able to basically read HTML into your application so that you could use it for the purposes of displaying items that you didn't want to have to format in our Xamarin application. So in this video, I wanted to show you how we can build a web application that uses the WebView control, because the HTML stuff I showed you in the last video has been deprecated, and so it was deprecated in favor of this WebView content control. And so when we want to deliver a web page as part of our client application, we can do this using WebView. And this is basically just an extension of the View class, and it works almost the exact same way. So I'm going to walk you through how to do this and how to load a website into your application, and then we'll look at some things that we can do once we have that loaded in. Okay, so we get started by adding a WebView content item into our view. And so you can do this by coming to the toolbox. It's down under the composite tools, and you'll find the WebView control. And so you can go ahead and place that on your view here. And if you're not sure how to get started with the project, make sure to go back, check out another video. But here we are just on our basic application. We have our WebView that we've added. Now, I don't typically give this a name because, the default WebView one is fine. Normally, if you're going to do this in your application, the web content is probably the entire activity. You can put other buttons and things on the screen with your WebView item, but it is going to start to look very crowded very quickly. So you typically don't see that. Okay, so once you have your WebView item added, we're going to come over to the manifest. So remember, the manifest is under properties. It's that XML file that controls permissions and the things that we need to do inside of our application. So we're going to add a line in here that says uses permission Android name, and we were wanting to add permission for the internet. So permission internet. So to be sure that this application, which is going to be calling a browser element essentially and calling out to a web page to load in, we want to be sure that we have that internet permission. So you can go ahead and save the manifest and close that. Now we're ready to add our code. So we'll come over to our main activity. Let me make that bigger so you can see it. Now the first thing we'll need to do is add our using statement for Android WebKit. So Android WebKit is the class library that has all of the elements in it that are required for when we are doing things like what we're doing, calling a web page, loading URLs, and creating HTTP clients. So real basic, come down here to your on create. So, we're going to get right here in the class. We're going to create our object instance. So we'll have WebView, and I'm just going to call it my WebView. And so down here in the on create, we have our base. You can leave that alone, that's fine. And so, and if you want to go ahead and do your set content view, that works just as well. So we'll have my WebView. We're going to do our find view by ID. It is a WebView item. And so that's resource ID, should be WebView1. And now, if you've seen in previous videos, sometimes I have a problem, and maybe you do too, where your IDs don't show up. You can always come check in the source for your activity in your main AXML, and make sure that the item is in there. But usually I just give it a build and that fixes it. And I'm not sure why those don't update clearly for me. And here I can see a build succeeded, and now it's found that item. It just seems to be a thing that has plagued me through many installs. So now we're going to set our WebView client, not Chrome client, we want the basic client. Now there is a Chrome client that you can use, and I'll talk about that here in a second. So this is a new WebView client, and one of the key things that we're going to do is we are going to enable JavaScript. So JavaScript is disabled in your WebView by default, and so you can enable it by doing My WebView Settings, JavaScript enabled equals true. Right? Very simple. So once we have JavaScript enabled for our page, then we will be able to also create interfaces between our application code and any JavaScript code that we might be running on the website, which is allows us to do some really cool things. So that just to get started, let's look at how we would load the web page, and we just use load URL. And then in here, the full URL that we want to load. So just to get us started, let's do Google. So we put it in there. You make sure it's in quotes. And that's it. That's all we have to do. We can go ahead and test this and make sure that it works. So let me go ahead and give that a little run. Okay, so you should be able to see when you run that test, sorry for the glare, that our app loads and then the page loads kind of like in a frame, right? Now, it looks kind of squished. It's not taking up the entire width of the frame. And if I come back over to the code, I will also point out that I said, go ahead and set your content view, and then I didn't do it. And then when I did my build, it didn't run. Go set your content view because I said it and then failed to type it. So you want to put that in there. Okay, so if you're essentially in your layout, if your web view is not filling the entire page, we can change that by coming over here into the source. Now, just using a web view inside of like a basic linear layout is typically not the way you would want to do this unless you are intending on adding more controls to the page. So to be quite honest, I would just take this linear layout out and make the web view all by itself. Now, it's technically bad form to remove the parent, but it will still run this way. So let's see, we'll give it the namespace, and we want schemas, Android, APK res Android, yep. And we want Android, oops, yep, okay. Layout, we're going to set the layout width to fill parent, and the layout height to fill parent. And we can go ahead and set the ID, and I can copy that from down here, and we'll get rid of all that. Okay, so that will ultimately build and work the way we want it to work. So if we run our application again, then what we should see is the same thing that we saw, where we're loading our Google page directly into the app frame, except now it should take up the entire width of the page that we see. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Let me get this over here. Okay, so now you see it's not so squished. I can get me out of the frame there. Right, so now it takes up the entire thing, and Google actually has this thing at the bottom that prompts you to install the app. And that's something that's coming off of their web page because we're allowing them to run JavaScript. So if we wanted to change ultimately the page that gets loaded in here. You just change whatever URL that you want to have loaded in. So this opens up a lot of possibilities of how we can render out HTML pages or maybe nicely done Bootstrap-enabled pages inside of the frame when we're wanting to load that content for our app users. So one of the fun things that I want to show you is how to handle page navigation if you are going to be serving HTML pages through your app's WebView frame. Because normally when the user clicks on a link that's inside of the WebView frame, then the default behavior for the Android operating system is to then launch an application that handles the URL, which would be the browser. So obviously, if we're wanting to retain our user inside of our app, then we need to be able to control the page navigation so that they stay inside of the WebView. So I'm going to change this to my own personal page that has some links on it. And you can go check this site out if you want. It's just a resource site for students because, I'm a college professor. And so when I teach classes on web development, I need a place to put links. So we want to be able to catch the navigation. So let me give you an example right now. If we go look at that sample page, right there it is. It's loading inside of the frame. And then we click the first link, which is just a starter HTML document that has some sample lorem ipsum. You can see that we're retained inside of the frame. However, if I click the back button, right down here at the bottom, the app exits, right, which is not the behavior that we want in this environment. We want to be able to go back to the previous page. So to get the functionality that we want, we're actually going to override the onBackPressed method that is part of your main activity. So make sure that you're outside of your onCreate method, but still inside of your class, and we'll do public override void onBackPressed. Now, instead of the base implementation, what we want is mywebview.goback. Because one of the beautiful things here is that your WebView is actually keeping track of the navigation and accumulating a history of visited web pages as you go. So now we should be able to give this a little test, and when we run, we'll see that page of links for my web development students. And then when I click on a link, I will see that content, whatever it is. And then if I hit the back button, it keeps me in the frame and takes me back to the home page that I started on. So that helps us retain that user inside of the WebView and inside of the app. Okay, so to wrap up this video, I want to show you one more thing, which is how to load a locally stored HTML file that you may want to display inside of your app for content reasons. And this way you don't have to have a URL and you're not actually navigating out to a page. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to load the file that we want to save into our Assets section. And so I'm going to come over here to my Solution Explorer, and in Assets I'm going to add an existing item, and I have a bunch of stuff out here for my github.io page. So I'm going to grab that index page that I have out here, the sample that I have that just has some basic HTML in it. So we can see that HTML file has been loaded into Assets. We can click on it and look at it. We can see it's just a bunch of dummy text inside of some HTML. So over here, instead of this line where we're loading in a URL, we would instead load in the file that we want to use. So my WebView load URL, and inside of the quotes, we would then load in the file. And let's see, we're going to do Assets, starter.htm. Nope, my mistake, not assets. That should be Android asset. You can tell I've been programming on a different platform here recently. Anything you put in the assets folder shows up under Android asset. Also make sure to pay attention to the fact there are 3 slashes here, and then the name of our file. And if you had multiple files, CSS, other stuff that you wanted, you could set up another folder in here to keep yourself organized. So now, if I give that a test run, what we should see in our app is when it loads, we get that basic content page, that sample HTML, and that is a local file, so I'm not actually navigating out to any URL. I'm loading in that file locally. So hopefully this helps. I can see there's a lot of reasons why our applications would ultimately need to load in HTML content. Maybe we are distributing information, or we just already have these pages built and there's no reason to go out there and remake them in our app layout if we already have the HTML available and we can serve it inside of our app environment. So feel free to leave any comments or questions. This project's code is available on GitHub, so if you want to go grab a sample of this so you can use it on your own, you're more than welcome to go download that off of my site. And I'll see you next time. Thanks.